close associate of Martin Luther King's throughout his life. And so he's writing, in the decades following King's death about his legacy, and just expresses some ambivalence, because on the one hand, he thinks it's important and a good thing that there is a Martin Luther King Day when he was involved in the campaign to create that in the 1980s. But also, I think is worried that by creating this holiday that King was sanitized a little bit, and that the power of his message, particularly of his message in his later years, before his untimely death, was sort of blunted and tamped down a little bit in elevating him to this pantheon of American heroes. And so he wrestles with that. But the passage in just one of these essays that stuck out to me was talking precisely about King in his later years. So he begins here by quoting King, who said, "My ministry is in obedience to the one who loved his enemies so fully that he died for them. What then can I say to the Viet Cong or to Castro or to Mao as a faithful minister of this one? Can I threaten them with death, or must I not share with them my life?" And Harding continues, "Who dares recall this man who defined the essence of his identity beyond the calling of race or nation or creed as a child of the living God, and sought to live by that definition, saying, I believe that the Father is deeply concerned especially for his suffering and helpless and outcast children, and I come tonight to speak for them." To recall King is to rethink our categories of nationalism, patriotism, and national security. For here is a national hero who loved his country and who claimed that speaking for the suffering people of every nation was, quote, "the privilege and burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties which are broader and deeper than nationalism and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions." Harding continues, "Here is a hero who declares that the love of God and the love of neighbor mean," quoting King now, "we are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those it calls enemy, for no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brother." So King obviously drew from his own Christian tradition, deep Christian faith, which is someone who isn't a Christian, I appreciate and respect, even if it's not my own. And he really drew from the call of his tradition and of mine and many others, right, to love our neighbor as ourselves, beyond the boundaries of race and nationalism and all of those things that divide people one from another. And I was thinking about this, and it occurred to me that seeing everyone as our neighbor, seeing everyone as our brother and sister, it sounds very kumbaya, but actually it's not. It requires tremendous work, tremendous effort, right? We can always find a reason to exclude someone from our universe of concern because they're not like us in whatever way that is. It's very easy to do that. The hard thing is to actually see all of our fellows, both in our own neighborhoods, in our own country, but really across the globe, right? Seeing them as our neighbors, as our brothers, as our sisters, as our siblings, even when it's always easy to find a reason not to. And that's very hard. As kumbaya and as nice as it sounds, it's actually very hard to do. And so that's what I'm thinking about, particularly in this particular climate, as Pastor Jim mentioned earlier, really thinking about what that means in our own time and place, to see beyond these boundaries of nation and race and creed. Our coming together today is one small part of that, of course, but it's really just a small part of that to on the one hand, celebrate all of these identities and not try to take that away from anyone, including from ourselves. But on the other hand, to try to see beyond some of those lines and see that as a reason to care for one another as opposed to a reason to not care for one another. And so, as simple as that message sounds, it's actually very important and very hard to do, and something that I'm thinking about today as we consider the legacy of Dr. King. So thank you.
Amen.